But yeah, so move on to the age of intellect. So this is kind of like, following on from the age of affluence, where, we're getting more thriving of intellectualism, more debate, more kind of academic pursuit happening in society. There's also a more clear divide between the kind of the more elite factions of that society and the regular kind of man in the street, where the elite's more focused on kind of rationalism, more kind of bureaucracy, trying to make everything run smooth, or and trying to be a bit more, maybe perhaps more pragmatic, although I'm not entirely sure that's the word I would use for it. Whereas you then have the man on the street being more kind of focused on tradition and being against the erasure of long held traditions in that society.
Yeah, and much
and I'm
more,
sure we'll cover a few examples.
The
of
man
that
on the street
soon
remains rooted in. He's a couple of stages back. He's still in sort of commerce, whereas the sort of
the thing is also
the middle classes are progressed to
remember,
intellect. So there becomes a sort of this funny divide where the two, and often you actually find the upper class, especially in the British example, the upper classes often find themselves having more in common with the working classes than they do with the middle classes, because you have this focus on kind of feudalism, tenant farmers, and on landed estates that the gentry own, and all that. Whereas the middle classes are kind of hiving themselves off into this more sort of intellectual world. So you do get that divide. I think you get it really starkly in the British example.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, there's some good points we can touch on.
And just that sort of that's why I think often the working class and the middle classes struggle to kind of speak to each other, because they are essentially in two different phases within their own world. The working class is very much rooted in every day it's work. It's simply, again, putting bread on the table. Whereas the middle classes can recede into a slightly more sort of pampered, not necessarily pampered, but more kind of comfortable existence, and sort of ponder. They can start to think and to ponder things, which is a great luxury that the sort of working classes don't have.
We'll revisit this point, because I think there's quite a lot of complexity to that argument, and I think there's some other kind of points to go through on that one in terms of maybe there's an argument to be made that in these 7 stages of empire, it is very much a kind of simplified version of reality, where we're really trying to categorize things into very specific boxes. But there's also the argument to be made that different classes of people in different empires, everyone's situation is completely different and individual, but there's an argument to be made that some factions or groups of people in these different empires even skip a few stages. That there's your ruling class, which may well go through every single stage, and they'll reach the heights of wealth a lot sooner. But then for the lower class, do they ever reach the stage of wealth? Do they ever reach the stage where they can be decadent? There's and that obviously is also what I think is a contributing factor to what we'll cover in a second, which is kind of the decline of the empire. So obviously, we've covered the age of intellect, so it's obviously a lot more kind of, we've talked a bit more about what that entails. And one interesting way, I actually noted it down, because I wasn't sure if I'm able to articulate it off the top of my head, but what I did note from reading about this stage is that this stage can be both the height of a culture and a seed of decline.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely touches on what we've just been talking about, because
it loses touch with reality, in the sense of if you recede too much into the intellectual, if you kind of philosophize beyond. I mean, there's lots of great philosophy that is rooted in experience and everyday stuff. But if your culture begins to kind of philosophize too much, it loses itself. It loses its and that's sort of to do with the land, I think, as well. The land plays a big part in this. And again, that's kind of what I was trying to get at slightly clumsily before. Is the the upper class, especially in the British example, and it doesn't always apply, but the upper classes and the working classes have this kind of connection to the land, and to the kind of rhythm of everyday life, in terms of farming and all the rest of it, in terms of the sort of the base stuff that produces the things that the middle classes rely on, so food, that everybody relies on, but they've lost a sense of, because they don't have anything to do with how that's made, they lose a sense of where they come from, where they are, and they can become sort of rootless and a bit lost. And I think, as you say, this is when decadence sets in, when there's a kind of gnawing sense of uncertainty about who you are as a people, because you're not connecting. You're not sort of touching grass, literally. I mean, you're not kind of connected to you're not connected to the earth anymore. You're in this, like with the Romans, the classic image is the sort of, the lounging in, draped in beautiful purple garments that would have, purple being a very expensive dye and a kind of signal of aristocracy. And eating grapes and having waved with a palm frond and all this kind of stuff. And and you look at a scene like that and drinking themselves into oblivion, and you look at that sort of classic sort of stereotype scene, and you think, okay, this is a people that have a portion of a people who have completely lost themselves and don't really know where they're going or where they're coming from.
I do have to say I love that we've diagnosed the problem of late stage empire is they just need to touch grass.
Yeah, basically, just touch some grass.
I think it's. I think that there's a reason that phrase message that we can take from this whole episode.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we should title it that: touching grass.
We all just need to. I mean, basically, what we need to do to avoid the fall of our society as an entity, we just all need to collectively touch grass.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the answer. We've solved society.
There you go. There you go, Rachel Reeves.
And that was an unintended consequence of this podcast, but we seem to have got there anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah.